Hey everyone, how you doing? It's Dr. Spear. It's been a long time since I made my last video about back calculating with ImageJ, and I've updated a few things and updated the macro, so I thought I'd do a new video. So let's check it out. Okay, so ImageJ is open source, very useful for measuring all kinds of things, and very useful for measuring otoliths. And the only trick is collecting the data, formatting the data. So I wrote an ImageJ macro, which helps with that, and I'm going to show you all the steps involved with back calculating fish otolith, fish lengths from the otolith using ImageJ, this macro, and Microsoft Excel. Okay, so the first step is to get ImageJ, which you can get anywhere. You just need to download it. You don't really install it. You can just launch it from the files that you download. The examples I'm using today are from version 1.54G, and I'm on a Windows PC. So if you're not on Windows, the clicks are gonna be a little different, but you'll be able to figure it out. So I downloaded and unpacked ImageJ. You don't really need to install it. I've launched it here. If you've never used ImageJ before, it's interesting. It's got several independent windows, and this is a feature, not a bug. This allows you to rearrange the windows however you want as you're working on the program. Now, one downside to having all those independent windows is that sometimes you're working on one window and the other windows go behind other windows, and you want to find them all back at once. And so instead of going and clicking on each window down to the taskbar at the bottom of the screen, an easy shortcut is Control close bracket, and you see that it brings all of ImageJ's windows to the top, and so then you can find the one that you want. Okay, so now we need to just set up a few things before we start back calculating. The first step is we're going to put all our images in the same folder with no other images. And that's because we're going to automatically cycle through the images, and so we don't want any other images in there messing things up. Then we're going to just set up the measurements we're going to take in ImageJ, and finally we're going to install the macro that I wrote, and then we'll be ready to start measuring the otoliths. You should have a large number of images of otoliths that you captured from your microscope camera, and that's what you're going to analyze. So the first thing you want to do is create a new folder and put all those images in that folder and nothing else. And so that's what I have right here. And if you look, I've got a bunch of images of otoliths and there's nothing else. And this is because we're going to cycle through all these images automatically. So we don't want anything else in there that's going to mess up our analysis. And it's just a nice way to keep things organized. Next, we need to set up a couple of things on ImageJ. This is just to make sure it's collecting the data that we want it to and not any extra data. So here I've got ImageJ, and I'm going to go to Analyze and Set Measurements. And then if you'll notice here, there's all kinds of things ImageJ can measure, and they're all unchecked except for Display Label. And so this will copy the file name to our data set, which is what we're going to need later on to join the otolith data with the fish data. But otherwise, we don't need anything else. The macro will take care of everything else that we need. Then, before we begin, we need to install the macro that I wrote. I didn't really write it. I found an existing macro, and I give credit to whoever wrote it within the macro. I can't remember where I found it, but it's a heck of a useful macro that somebody else wrote, so thank you for that. I just took it and modified it for our purposes. And so we need to install that before we do any analysis. And so there's different ways of doing this. Here's the easiest. We're going to go to Plugins, then Macros, then Install. And then we're going to find the macro that I wrote, and it's in a text file. and it's called Back Calculate Odolith version 2. And I'll leave information in the comments for how you can get this text file. And we hit open, and then that's it. It's installed. So if I go to Plugins, Macros, now you see we have this option for Measure Odolith. And so that's there now because we installed my macro, and my macro is called Measure Odolith. Now, there are ways to make this automatically load. And so you can set it up that every time you launch ImageJ, it automatically just includes my macro. And we're not going to get into that now, but you can do that if you use this all the time. Now we're ready to actually measure the distances on the odolith that we need to use for back calculating. So what we're going to do is we're going to open the first image in the folder. Then we're going to mark the focus, all the annuli, and the edge of the odolith using the multi-point tool. And once we've got them all marked properly, then we can run the macro, and the macro will do all the math to determine the lengths from the focus to each of the annuli, to determine the length from the focus to the edge of the odolith. Those are the values you need for back calculating. And so then we'll move on to the next image. Now we're ready to mark and measure our first odolith image. And so I'm going to go to File, Open, and I'm going to pick the first image. And I can also use Control O if I wanted to do that. And then one thing I want to do is to resize the images, make them a little bigger. And so I can click and drag, or I can select the image and hit the plus on my keyboard, and that zooms in. And that's a pretty good size right there. I can see everything I need to see there. So I'm going to get that adjusted how I want it adjusted to the size I want. And then all future ones will open up and be about the same size. So now I can see exactly where I need to mark. Okay. The first thing I need to do, or what I need to do to get started, is I need to use the multi-point tool. And that's right here. And sometimes it might look like this. You might have the single point tool. And so if you have the single point tool, you just right click and switch it over to the multi-point tool. And so this is one of the things that's different about the new way that I do this back calculation. Is I used to use like the segmented line or something like that. But this multi-point tool, I think, is easier and it goes faster. And so once you have the multi-point tool, it will make multiple points. And so everywhere you click will make a point, and it'll number the points. And so one thing you can do, obviously these are not good points if I'm measuring this odolith. If you make a mistake, you can go Alt, click, and it will allow you to remove any bad points. You can also do Control A and just get rid of them all at once. So if you screw up, that's how you can fix things. One other thing that you can do is to adjust the marks to make them easier to see. And so if I double click this, you see I get a little dialog where I can change different options, and I can change the size of it. And one nice thing is that it will number each of the points, so you can easily tell which points you clicked on in which order, which is going to be important here in a second. Now we're ready to mark the odolith. So we need to mark the focus, each annulus, and the edge of the odolith. Here is the most important thing. For my macro to work, you have to click on the focus first. And that's because the focus is the anchor, right? We're measuring the distance from the focus to each annulus and the distance from the focus to the odolith edge. And so the macro needs to know which mark is the focus. And so the easiest way to do that is to just mark it first. So that's the only thing. You got to mark the focus first. You can mark the remaining things in any order, but mark the focus first. And so what we're going to do is we're going to click on the center of the focus, and then we're just going to click on each annulus to mark it. And just a couple things, you want to work in a straight line. You can't just mark each annulus at any random spot. That doesn't work. We need these to be proportional, so they need to be in a straight line. I try to always mark in the same spot on each annulus, so either the front edge or the back edge. I like to go in the middle. As long as you're consistent, I think is the most important thing. And so then we are marking each annulus, and then also we're going to mark the edge of the otolith. And like I said, as long as you do the focus first, and you can see that we did the focus first because it's got the number 1. As long as you do the focus first, you can do these in any order. So we want to make sure that we've got this otolith properly marked in the way we want. And once we do, now it's time to run the macro to actually collect the data. So one thing you can do is go to plugins, macros, and then just choose the measure otolith macro, which you installed. And it went pretty quick, but you can see what happened. So the macro used the coordinates of each of those points you marked and simple geometry to determine the distance between the focus and each of those other marks. And then it formatted them in a way that's going to be useful to us. And it wrote all that information here to the results window. You saw the results window popped up for the first time. And so you can see that we've got the ID number, which is the file name. And so this is going to be critical because later on, we need to match this otolith data with the fish data, like the fish's length and where we caught it, stuff like that. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to match the file names between the two spreadsheets. You see that it calculated visible annuli. And so we always like to talk about visible annuli. You know, if the fish was caught in the spring, there might be an annulus on the edge that's not visible. If it's caught in the fall, I think these images that we're looking at here are probably saugeye otoliths, and they were caught in the fall. And so there's no hidden annulus on the edge. For whatever reason, I think it's important to mark down the visible annuli, and then later on, based upon the date of capture, you can actually give an age to this fish. You see we've got the otolith length. Now these are unitless values, or they're in pixels actually. It doesn't matter because we're looking at the proportion. So we've got the length of the otolith from the focus to the edge, and then this is the length from the focus to the first annulus, to the second annulus, the third annulus, and so on. And you see that we've got them all nicely formatted. And so then we'll take the ratio of each of these distances to the otolith length, and that's proportional to the length of the fish at that age. And so we'll just take that proportion, multiply it by the length at capture, and then you'll have the back calculated length of age. Okay. And so then the other thing the macro did is after it did all those calculations, and then you'll notice we've got a different image here. It automatically opened up the next image in the folder. So that's why we wanted to put all our images in the same folder with no other images. And so now the next image is queued up and is ready to go. And so we can just go ahead and click on this image, and then we've still got the multi-point tool selected. You'll notice the macro also cleared off our old marks, and so we're ready to start again. So we mark the focus, and we mark each annulus. And I think there's only 2 there. And now that I've got the otolith marked, I can go to plugins, macros, run it. And you see now we've got the second image and its data. And you see we've only got lengths for a couple of the ages because this was a younger fish. You see the marks are cleared, and you see the next image is brought up. And so we can go ahead and work on that one. So we'll just click on it and click on the focus. And again, as long as we click on the focus first, we're fine. And so now I can come and I can click on the otolith edge if I want, and then come back and click on this annulus. And when I run the macro, you'll see that I got the correct data in the correct order. You see, here's the otolith length and the distance to the first annulus. Even though I didn't click on them in that order, it's easy to figure out. It's easy to sort them from shortest to longest, but you have to click on the focus first. Okay, and so then the next thing I want to show you is, again, we got the the next image brought up. We click on it to activate it, and we're ready to mark it. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this one. Now, instead of running the macro by coming up here and going plugins and macros and then choosing the macro, if you look at the name of this macro, you see it's got a little number 1 in brackets. And that indicates the keyboard shortcut. And I set up a keyboard shortcut for this macro within the macro. So when you install the macro, that already became the keyboard shortcut. And I figured, you know, the number 1 was safe because you don't usually type any numbers, but you can change that in the macro if you want. At any rate, so we don't even have to come up here and do all this clicking. Once I've got the otolith marked, I could just hit the number 1 on my keyboard and it ran it. And so you'll notice that we've got the new data, the marks are cleared, and here's the next image. And so these are kind of the new things that I've updated in the macro to make it run quite a bit faster. And so once you get this set up, if you have everything set up correctly, you can crank through these pretty quick. So I got to click on this to activate it, and then mark the focus, each annulus. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, that's about right. The edge. Hit 1 on the keyboard, and now I'm ready for the next one. And I click on it. You got to click on the image to activate it. Then your next click is the focus. And I can do these in any order. I can come here, and I can come here, and I can come, ooh, this is the tougher one. It looks like maybe there's 1, and then maybe there's 1. You know, I think so. And so the annuli, the focus, the otolith edge, I can do those in any order. As long as I did the focus first, and you see it's got number 1. I hit 1 on the keyboard, and you see I got all the data are correct. And so I can just really bang through these quickly with this new version of the macro. And so that's what you need to do, is just keep cranking through them. Once we've collected all our data in ImageJ, then we're just going to move it to Microsoft Excel. And then we're going to work on it in Excel before we do the back calculations. Now that I have collected data from a few of these images, I want to copy the data over into Excel. Now you could just go ahead and do all your images and wait till the very end. I like to do it periodically just in case something happens. I don't screw up and have to start all over again. Doesn't really matter. So I've got the data here in the results window. Now you could go File, Save As, and save this as a CSV or something like that. I don't like to do that. I don't like the headers it gives you. You have to rename the file each time if you keep saving new, with new data. I don't know. I just like copying and pasting into Excel. It just seems to work easier for me. I can keep an eye on things better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the results window, and I'm going to go Control A to select all the data. Then I'm going to go Control C to copy all the data. Then I'm going to pull up a spreadsheet that I have already set up. And so I set this up with the headers that I want. So I'm going to select this first cell here and go Control V, and there are the data. And so you see the data are in the proper column, and that's the data that I'm going to need. So as I collect more otolith data, I'm just going to copy it. I'm going to paste it down here. When I get done, I'm going to have a spreadsheet with all my otolith data, and each row is going to be labeled by this file name so that I can link these data back to the original fish data. Now, once we've collected the otolith data, we're going to need to merge it with existing fish data. So we've got the distances that we measured on the otolith, but we need the length of the fish so that we can actually calculate its length at each age. And of course, we're going to need all the other information for that fish too, like species, when it was captured, and things like that. So we're going to have to merge these two data sets. And so we're going to use the otolith data that we just collected in ImageJ as a lookup table in Excel. And then once we have that lookup table, we can just look up the proper values for each fish, and that's how we're going to merge them together. Okay, so we're done with ImageJ. We used ImageJ to measure our otoliths, and we put those data into a spreadsheet, and you see this spreadsheet here. So the rest of our work is going to be just in Excel. And so I took the spreadsheet with all the otolith data, and I pasted it into the file that's got my fish data. And so it's its own sheet. And so here it's a new sheet called otolith data. And it's got the file name, the annuli, the otolith length, the distance to each annulus, all the stuff we need for back calculating. And so we're going to use this as a lookup table so that we can match it with the fish data. So since this is going to be a lookup table, it needs to be in order. And it needs to be in order by the thing we're going to use to link it back to the original data. And so we're going to use the file name to link this back to the original data. So these data have to be ordered by file name, and they already are, you can see that. And also, the data we're going to use to look up, the data we're going to use to link this back to the original data has to be in the first column. It's not, it's in the second column. That's fine. When we go and select the data, we're going to start by selecting right here. We're going to just ignore this first column. But you got to have this sorted by this lookup value. Okay, so that's one sheet. So then if we go over to the other sheet's got all the existing fish data. And so we've got the date of capture, the fish ID, the length of the fish, the weight of the fish. This is the age we determined when we took the otolith images. And then here's that file name. So here, now we can match the otolith data to the fish data using this file name. You can have as much or as little data as you want here, but you got to have this file name so you can link them up. And you got to have this length so you can do the back calculations. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use a VLOOKUP function. And so the otolith data is what we call the lookup table. And so this is where we're going to search for each fish. We're going to search and find the matching file name, and then we're going to copy over all the data for that fish or whatever data we need from that fish. First thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and copy these headers because I'm going to be using them. And so I'm going to paste those here. And oops, I selected that first thing. I don't want that. I just want the headers. Okay, and so I'm going to set up the lookup formula in this first cell. And so a nice way to do this is to go to formulas and then insert function. And then if you search for VLOOKUP, you can see I've used it recently, so it's right here, or you can search for VLOOKUP up here. So VLOOKUP is what you want. And so we get this dialog box that helps us set up the VLOOKUP function. So the first thing it asks for is the lookup value. This is the value that you're going to use to link the two spreadsheets. You know, you're going to look up this value in the lookup table. For us, that's the file name. So I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to select the file name for this fish. And so you see it set that up to be cell F2. Perfect. The table array, that's the lookup table. This is where you're going to go look for matching data. Well, that's our otolith data. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to switch to the otolith data sheet. And I need to search through all these data. But remember, the lookup value, the value that we're going to use to match these two together has to be in the first column. So I'm going to start with this column, and I'm going to select all the otolith data. And so I can do that with the mouse. Here's an easy way to do that. I can select this first cell, and I can go Control, Shift, right arrow to select all the way across. And then I can go Control, Shift, down arrow to select all the data. And so you see that I've selected all the otolith data, and I'm ignoring that first column. That's because I need my lookup value in the first column of the table array, which is what I have now. And so you can see the table array is now set up properly. So now I need the column index number. So what this is saying is, once I find a match, which column of the lookup table do I need to pull data from? So I only got one cell. I can only put one piece of data in. So in this particular example, I'm looking for the visible annuli for this matching fish. So I come back over here to the otolith data, and when you make that lookup table, column 1 is the column with your lookup value, always. So then column 2 is the next column, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So the matching data I need for this formula is in column 2, right? It's not column 1. Column 1, it's got my lookup value. So I need column 2. So I'm going to come back over here to fish data, and I'm going to clear that out. Don't need that. Column index number is 2. And finally, for this range lookup, I want to type in false. And I always use false. I don't know why you'd ever use true, but it's just one of those things. So what do we have here? We've got this VLOOKUP that's saying, hey, I'm going to go to cell F2, and I'm going to read what value is there. Then I'm going to jump over to this lookup table, which happens to be our otolith data. I'm going to search the first column of the lookup table until I find a match. When I find the match, I'm going to go to the second column, pull that data, and I'm going to put it in this cell. And so when I hit OK, there you have it. And so let's see if it worked. So we're looking for fish whose file name is 0195.bmp. So if I come over to the lookup table, 0195.bmp. And so now I found a match. I need the data from the second column in the lookup table, and that's right here, 4. So it worked. So there you go. This is how I'm going to link the otolith data to the fish data. I'm just going to look up these file names and find the matching data. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this formula to the rest of the fish. And so I can have the visible annuli for each fish. So a quick way of doing that is this little square here in the corner. I'm just going to double click that. When it turns to a plus, I'm going to double click it. And it copies that formula all the way down. But we have a problem. Look at all these NAs, all these errors. There should be data for all these fish, and there's not. There's something squirrely going on. What's going on? Well, let me tell you. This is something that you need to really understand about Excel to work well with Excel. And it has to do with relative references versus absolute references. So when I look in this formula, it's going to be looking in cell F2. That is what we call a relative reference. It's not really, Excel is not really thinking, hey, go to cell F2 and pull the data. Excel is thinking, hey, go one cell to the left and pull the data. So when I copy this formula to any other cell, it's always going to look one cell to the left. So if I go down to the next formula, you see it's not looking in F2, it's looking in F3. Well, that's fine. That's good. That's what we want. We don't want to look at F2 for each of these. We want to look at F3. So that's the advantage of a relative reference. When I copy it down, it looks relative to where the formula is, and so I can update the formula for each row. So that's fine. That's not a problem. If I go to the next one, you see it's looking for the data in cell F4, and that's what we want. So that's not the problem. The problem is that it's also using a relative reference for the lookup table. So if you go to the original formula, you see our lookup table is on the otolith data tab from cell B1 to cell J51. If we go back and look, you start at B1, you go down to J51, that's the otolith data. This is where it's going to look, and that's fine. But when I copy that formula down, it's using the relative reference for the range as well. So you see, it's no longer looking from B1 to J51. It's looking at B2 to J52. Here it's looking at B3 to J53, and so on. So each time it looks, it's looking in a different spot. And so if we come down here, where we get this first error, it's looking in B10 to J60. So let's go look at B10 to J60. Whoa, that went out of control. Wow, that went really fast. Come up here, okay, here. So that's where that formula is looking for data. And it's looking for 0198.bmp. Well, it's not there. Here's 0198.bmp. It's not in that range. So it's looking in this range that's shaded for this value, but it can't find it. And so that's why it's giving you an error. Okay, well, this is easily fixed. Instead of a relative reference, we want an absolute reference. So if we come back to the first formula, we see that, again, we want the lookup value to be relative, but we want the lookup table to be absolute. We always want to look in this range, okay? And so the way we're going to do that is we're going to put a $ in front of the column and a $ in front of the row. Now we're locking it to B1. So wherever we copy this formula, it's always going to be locked to cell B1. We also want to lock it to cell J51. So we need to do the same thing. Well, let me show you a quick shortcut. Instead of typing both of those $, just select that cell and hit the F4 key, and there you go. And now we got the same formula, but it's locked to this absolute range. So now I'm going to copy this formula down, and you see that it works. So if I go to the next cell, I'm looking at cell F3, the relative reference, because I'm in a new row, I'm in a new fish, but I'm still looking in the exact same lookup table. And if I come to any of these, I'm looking in the exact same lookup table. So sometimes you want a relative reference, sometimes you want an absolute reference. This is one of those times where we want a little of both. Perfect. Okay, so now we just need to look up the remaining values and match them up here. So I'm going to take this lookup and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy it over here. And it didn't work. What happened? Well, it's the same, kind of the same problem as before. Actually, it's a similar problem as before. It's a relative versus absolute. So look at the formula again. You see, because we locked the lookup table to these cells, that's an absolute reference. So even though we copied the formula over, we moved the formula, we're still looking in the same place. That's good. We want to look in the same place. But we still have that relative reference. See, now we're still looking one to the left. And so when we go one to the left, we're not looking at the file name, we're looking at the number of visible annuli. That ain't right. So we need to lock the lookup value to the correct lookup value. And so we need this first value to also be absolute. So I'm going to hit F4, make it absolute, and then I'm going to copy it over. And you see that now that it works, right? But what happens when I copy this down? I get the same answer every time. Well, that's because if you look, again, so now each of these formulas is now looking in cell F2. It's not updating. So we need, we need it kind of absolute and kind of relative. We need that part of the formula to always look in column F, but we need it to update for each row, for each fish. And so what we need to do is instead of putting a $ in front of both the column and the row, we want the $ just in front of the column. Okay? So when I copy this over, now I'm still looking in column F, but when I copy it down, now I'm updating it for each row. So I'm locking it to a column but not a row. That's great. However, we still don't have the right data, do we? This is supposed to be the otolith length, and it's giving me the visible annuli. Why is that? Well, you can see that it's this last value. We're still looking up in column 2 of the lookup table. And so if I come over to the lookup table, again, column 1 has got the lookup value. Column 2 is the visible annuli. For otolith length, we need column 3. So we need to update this to say column 3. And there you go. And now if I copy this down, now I have the otolith length for each fish. So a lot of things going on here, but you got to get them all right. But once you get comfortable with this, it's a very nice way to combine two spreadsheets. So now I'm going to go ahead and copy this over again. And I still have a problem, right? I'm still getting the otolith length. You see that I'm looking in the correct column for the lookup value. I'm looking in the correct place for the lookup table, but I'm still looking in column 3, which is otolith length. What I need is column 4. And there is the first annulus length. And so I'll copy this over. And I just need to update the column. Now I need column 5. Copy it over. Update this for column 6. And you could, work out a formula and do this program, make this a program or make this easier to do. But really, this takes 2 seconds. And you're done. So I just have to update that column each time. So I'm looking in the right spot. I'm looking in the right table array. Did I do that right? That's supposed to be 9? Yeah. Okay. Now I finally have the right data. So now I can select those, all of those, double click this little square, and there you go. Boom. Now I have linked the otolith data to each fish, and now we can do the back calculations. Finally, we now have all the data merged. We have everything together that we need. So now we can use Excel to calculate the length and age for each fish, and that was our goal all along.
Now that we've collected the data and we've linked the otolith length data to the fish data, we can finally do our back calculations. And so we're going to go ahead and just do that in Excel as well. So I've made some new column headers for the total length in millimeters at each age. And so we just need to take the ratio of the annulus length to the otolith length and then multiply that proportion by the length of capture to get the length at each age. These are otoliths, so they usually don't require any sort of correction to the value. So simple formula. First, I want to get that ratio. So I'm going to go equal, and I want to put it in parentheses, and I want to take the first annulus distance divided by the otolith length, close parentheses. So there's my ratio, and I want to multiply it by the length of capture, which is that cell there. I hit return, and there's the length of that fish when it turned 1 year old. Perfect. And so what I need to do is go ahead and copy that over to get the age 2 length. And you see I get kind of a crazy value. And again, I've got a relative versus absolute reference problem. So when I copied that formula over, it updated everything based on the relative references. So now it's looking at the age 2 annulus length, which is what we want. We wanted that one to update, but we want to compare this to the otolith length, and it's comparing it to column I, not column H. You know, we want to lock it to the otolith length. We need that to be a semi-absolute. So what we need to do is come back to the original formula, and instead of H2, we need to put a $sign in front of that H. So we always update the annulus length, but we always compare it to the same otolith length. And while we're here, we also want to always compare it to the length at capture, which is in column C. So we're going to lock that to column C as well. We want the rows to vary, so it's different for each fish, but we always want to look in the same columns for those last two values. So now, when I copy this over, I see that I get the correct value. And if I look at the formula, you see that, you know, it's looking at the age 2 annulus, but it's comparing it to the same otolith length and the same total length. So there you go. That's what we need. So we're going to copy this all the way over. And so now for that fish, here's its length at each age. And so then I'm going to just copy those formulas down. And I've got it. There's my back calculation data. Now there's one last thing we need to do. You see that for all these fish, you know, that are younger than 6, we've got a bunch of zeros here for their length at age. We need to get rid of those. We're going to do some analysis on these data later. So for example, we might ask, what was the mean length at age 4? Well, those zeros would screw up that average, right? These aren't really zeros. These are no data. We need to get rid of them. And so I did this before in Excel and it worked, and now I can't get it to work. I don't quite understand. Let me show you what's going on, and then I'll show you how I solved it, and then you may have a better solution. Typically what I would do is I would select those columns, and I would go to the Home tab, and I would go to Find and Select, Replace, or I would hit Control H. And so I want to find what? 0. I want to replace it with just nothing. I'm not going to type anything here, not a space, not anything. And then I'm going to match entire cell contents. And so then usually I say, I go Find Next to make sure it's working, but it's saying it can't find it. Well, there's a bunch of zeros there. It's not finding it. So maybe it's because it's 0.000. And so I go Find Next. Nope, doesn't like that. Well, that's no good. You know, maybe I don't want this match entire cell contents, but I'm pretty sure I do. Because if I go Find Next, I see it's found the 0 in this header. Well, I don't want to replace that. And so it's only finding those zeros. It's not finding these zeros down here. Now, I've got this to work before. And I tried all the different options, and I don't quite know why it won't find and replace those zeros. Whatever. You know, sometimes you just got to be able to do a workaround. So here's my workaround. So I'm just going to select one of these cells. I'm going to go to the Data tab. I'm going to click on Filter. And then for each of these, I'm going to look at the values, and I'm going to select the ones that have those zeros. And I'm just going to highlight, delete. And now I'm going to go to the next one. Select just the zeros. Highlight. Now you see, I can go all the way across, and I can delete them that way. Because those are all those zeros have to go. And so then I can go to H3. And it takes a second. Like I said, usually the Find Replace works for me. So I don't know why it's not working. But there you go. So let me just do the last ones. I've come this far. Let's get all the way through. what do you know? Turn that off. And there you have it. Now I've got blanks where the zeros were. I've got the length at age for each fish. Now I can load this into R, do some analysis. Great. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you got any questions. And that's it. So have a great day.